And welcome back. Well, as you can see, we're beginning to add a little bit of colour to our model Messerschmitt. Just a little bit. Okay, let's close that down. Confession. Who, me? Yes, me. A little confession. Now, there are certain tools, I would say time-saving tools, which I've avoided using during these tutorials. Now, I've avoided using them because they have had a tendency to cause the screen to freeze whenever I'm recording these tutorials. Now, that actually got me thinking that it may have something to do with my graphics card. So I've had a look at that, tinkered around with it a little bit, and I think I've resolved the issue. So what are these time-saving little tools that we could have used? Well, one of them is the isolation mode. Now, you've noticed that I'm always going into the layers manager and hiding things. If we wanted to work on a piece of geometry or several pieces of geometry, what I could have done is selected the geometry and pressed Alt and Q. That puts it into isolation mode, and this is where my screen would have frozen and I've had to completely reset 3ds Max. Well, it doesn't do that anymore, so guess who's a happy bunny? Now, the other thing was certain selection tools. You'll notice in the last tutorial I was actually coming round and labouring over the selection of these polygons here. Well, there is this selection tool here, and it's called the fence selection region, and how that works is quite simple. Left click with the mouse, drag it out, bring it round, and what I want these sections round here, and let's close it off, and there we go, everything's selected. Okay, so some things to keep in mind there. Okay, well, let's deselect that and let's exit isolation mode. Well, we're going to leave the propellers, the propeller housing and the nose cone for the time being, because I want to introduce you to UVW mapping. So okay, let's pop here to root and close that down, and we're going to do that on the exhaust ports here. So let's select the exhaust ports, Alt Q to go into isolation mode. Now, UVW mapping. What does UVW mean? Well, we've got UVW XYZ. What's XYZ? Well, they're the coordinates for our scene. UVW are the coordinates for our geometry. Now, that means coordinates for our geometry in its space. So they exist within the X, Y and Z coordinates of our scene. And that's all UVW means. So how are we going to add a UVW map? Well, we have our geometry selected. Let's pop up to modify our list, and we're going to pop down now, and we can see that we've got various things about UVW. Unwrap UVW, which we're going to be looking at a little bit later on, but we've got UVW map, UVW map adding, UVW map clear, and Xform, etc. The one we want is UVW map. So I'm going to select that, and now we have it in our modifier stack. Now, before we can really start using this, we do need to add a material to our geometry. So let's pop up to our material editor, select a blank swatch, left wing, well, I'm just going to rename that exhaust. Enter. And now I'm going to pop down here to this tab at the side of diffuse, left click. I'm going to look for a bitmap, and what I've got here is one called red rust, blue tarnish, but these are PNG files. So I'm going to open this up and say I want to look at all files. Now I do have some reference material here which is my own, and I've imported into my image file. So I'm going to select that. We have it now in there, so let's open this up, and you can see it's quite a brown rusty looking colour. It's the kind of colour that you would expect for an exhaust. Okay, let's pop back up now one level, and I'm going to come down to maps. What I want to do now is simply drag, so left click with the mouse, and I'm going to drag that down to bump. Make a copy of it and say OK. You can see a slight change there. It's looking as though it's got a bit more texture, so let's just increase that. Well, there is a slight change there. Okay, now that we have that there, I'm going to apply it to our exhaust ports. We'll close that down. That doesn't look too brilliant, and if I render it, no, that doesn't look any good at all. Okay, so let's close that down, and now let's look at our parameters. Well, at the moment we've got our mapping set to planar, but we could set this to cylindrical, spherical, shrink wrap, box. It's looking a little bit better. Face, or XYZ to UVW, and that's in relation to our scene coordinates and our UVW coordinates. Let's have a look at box for a start. Now, also down here we have UV tiles. Now I know that this material doesn't really tile well, so if we were to have a look at this and put in, say, 4 tiles, press return, as you can see it looks more like wood than rusty metal, so we're going to leave it at 1 tile and press return. If we do a quick render of this, let's have a look. So we go render, and you think actually that doesn't look too bad as it is. Alright, we could use that, but I want to play around with this for a bit. So let's take this box, put it into rotation mode, and I want to rotate it. It's actually better if we select the gimbal, and I want to rotate this gimbal, and as you can see, as I'm rotating it, it's altering the position of our image, our UV mapping. So let's rotate that round a little bit more. Now what I'm looking for is something that's not uniform as far as each of these exhaust ports is concerned. I want it to look as though some are burnt on the edges, etc., so it's not repetitive. Let's have a render of that. That doesn't look too bad at all, but it does seem repetitive in that section there. So let's try and adjust this a little bit more. Now you can see a seam down there. We don't want that, so let's take that out. Just close this down for a moment. Perhaps bring it round a little bit more. So I'm looking for that. Actually, that's looking quite good there. Let's do a quick render. That looks quite good. So deselect that for a moment. Let's just have a look at that. So what we did was we popped into our gizmo, our gimbal layer. We're in box mode. We could have had it in cylindrical mode, and that would have put it into a cylinder. So it would have meant changing that round until it came out. What we're doing is looking for something that's quite good in that section. Let's undo that because I know it's the box mode which we required. Okay, and it's as simple as that, applying a UV map. Well, let's exit our isolation mode and we'll pop into render, and let's do a render. That doesn't look too bad. Okay, so we can accept that, close that, and what I'm going to do now is right click and say convert to an editable poly. So we've collapsed the stack there, and that UV map is now fixed to that piece of geometry. But be aware that we can still make modifications to our material within the material editor. Let's just have a look. Go M. Here we are. We could make those modifications and that would be updated within our piece of geometry, because all we've set is the UVW coordinates. Now we need to repeat this process to the other exhaust, but mindful of the time, we'll actually continue this in the next session. Okay? I'll catch you later.